Hello everyone, Arun Vanagopal of WNYC here. It's my pleasure to introduce the Center for Traditional Music and Dances series, Beat of the Boroughs, NYC Online. This online series features over 50 of New York's leading traditional instrumentalists, dancers, singers, poets, and more. From Mongolia to Haiti, Colombia to the Gambia, among many others, they remind us how the strength of our country lies in its embrace of diversity and immigration. We want to celebrate these remarkable members of the New York community in these challenging times. So please enjoy these 50 programs, share them with your friends, and spread the word. Enjoy the show.
Hey, Frank.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So let's do. I don't quite know what the introduction process is here, so I'm just going to tell people that my name is Dan Blacksberg. I'm a trombonist in Philadelphia, and I'm helping CTMD with their program by recording some interviews with some really close friends of mine. And today, I get to talk to one of my favorite people, Mr. Frank London, the Honorable Sir Frank London, recently knighted and Grammy Award-winning trumpet player and composer and co-founder of bands like the Klezmatics and Hasidic New Wave. So look Frank up. He's done a million things. There's so many things, and he's played with all sorts of people. John Zorn, Itzhak Perlman, LL Cool J, Lester Bowie, They Might Be Giants, David Byrne. I mean, come on. That's cool. So anyway, it's good to see you in this moment. We haven't actually, I can't remember if we would have necessarily been playing some, well, you know what? That's not true. We actually would be working on a brand new project this week instead of in normal times in Krakow, Poland.
That's true. We would be, wouldn't we? Yes, we would.
How about that? Oh boy. So yeah, so this is like an offshoot or a connection to my podcast Radiant Others, which I talk to people who are in the klezmer world, and like the whole point of the podcast for me is to really represent or give people an in the way that I felt like I had an in and got me really excited about being a klezmer musician and just a musician in general. And actually, like, you have a really important role in that because you gave me some of the first opportunities that got me really excited about all this stuff. And the first thing I can remember was inviting me to come play with you at Satala. I think this is in 2004. That place with...
Satala, long gone.
Yes, but that place with all of the fluorescent paint, so much fluorescent paint. And, you know, I was like 20 at the time and was like, oh my God, you know, I'm playing with the people. And then the other side of it that also you were around for was that same year at Klez Camp. This was my second year at Klez Camp. There was some like late night hang with I think you and Aaron Alexander and Mark Rubin and Susan Watts and I think Michael Wex and some other folks, probably Merlin Shepard at the time. And one of the things that happened is you all were talking about tour stories. We're just sharing tour stories from the Brotherhood, like, you know, Klezmer Brass All-Stars. And there's this one epic story that I can't quite remember featuring Mark and Aaron. And again, here I am, this 20-year-old guy, still in music school, not like a professional musician, not really knowing what's going on, and kind of like absorbing all this stuff and hearing, just being around and just going, you know, wide-eyed, big-eared, and just like, this is cool. I want my life to be like this. And so I think with this podcast and like us getting to talk together, you know, people can, you for example have had a lot of people have a lot of opportunity to you know, find out who you are, what you've done, and they should definitely check that out if they don't know you. But I want to bring in people into sort of like that intimate space where it's just musicians talking about what keeps them going and gets them excited about stuff. So I think the first thing I'll say is like, do you remember any specific times or like how do you relate to that idea of like seeing like a group of people? Because this was, for me, it was like becoming part of a scene or getting sort of access or being invited into a community or like a scene of musicians. And that was like what was so exciting and got me to work on my own music and stuff. And so like, yeah, I mean, you've been a part of a lot of scenes or found your way into a lot of scenes. And like, yeah, how has that worked for you in some of your life?
Oh, there's so much to say about that, Dan. It's a fun and funny question. one of my earliest gigs, I'm going to get roundabout answer to the question. One of my earliest gigs, uh, either before, probably before the Klezmatic something, I was doing a lot of jazz, and we came down to Philadelphia, where you are now, with my buddy at the time, Mike Gray, whose father was the great trombone player Al Gray, and Al Gray and the great trumpeter Johnny Coles were down in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
and me and Mike drove down to record the second trumpet and second trombone parts with Al Gray and Johnny Coles on Al Gray's book of his plunger method book. And I had one of those feelings like you're talking about. I can't believe I'm hanging with these legendary cats who have done so much and been such a part of jazz history. Al Gray was famous for working in Count Basie's band. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. They played with Mingus and everybody. And that feeling, and I remember Al Gray, again, that similar thing. He was probably we were in our 20s. He was probably in his 50s, which felt ancient, and nobody's that old,
No,
and
definitely
trying
not.
to give us young cats his wisdom, and basically, what he was trying to tell us is basically, yeah, that what you had to do to have a life and a career in music, you just had to stick with it and show up and be there. You just had to be there. You had to be, and being there kind of meant literally being there. That you got the call for a gig and you went and you hung out before and afterwards. And being there also in the deeper sense meant being fully present in the musical situation and really being there and listening and being attentive and alert and listening and being there. And and I think a lot about the scenes that you're talking about, because yeah, of course everything has its scene. It's a part of being there. You want to hang out. It's like, on one hand, the gig, the playing, the music is the most important thing. Let's not in any way romanticize the aspects about the life over the actual music. And sitting here in this quarantine, in this pandemic, without being able to play concerts or travel or anything, what I miss isn't the hang, it's the music.
Yeah, totally.
It's
That's
the playing the
100%.
music. But that being said, the hang is part of the experience, and that's what builds the camaraderie between the people, and you share stories, and you have you have experience that become more stories. And you're absolutely correct that on one hand, I am part of many scenes because I would hang out in many different situations. I've always been someone to throw myself into something and just, sometimes be an active participant and sometimes just be a fly on the wall. But in any case, you really meet people and you get to have opportunities. I got to play with my hero, Lester Bowie, in his Brass Fantasy
That's so cool.
because, well, I lived down the block from him and they would rehearse at his house.
That's a good
And
move.
I would just call him up and say, "Hey, Lester, can I hang out at your house during the rehearsal?" And
Mm.
listen. And then one day, of course, someone didn't show up for the rehearsal, and guess who had his horn there? You, you,
Yes.
so being part of the scene is hanging out, and then and then part of my joy, and this is both a social thing and an artistic musical thing, is mixing up these scenes. That's part of what I love to do. And on one hand, it's as literal as taking people I know who might never normally have their paths cross because they are in such different scenes that there's no reason that they would ever have their paths cross. And I say, there's going to be some great music by putting the two of you together or the five of you together. But also, like you said, introducing you to people who don't know you, and introducing people. There's a great joy in that, and sometimes I get a little jealous when people I've introduced to each other end up going on and doing amazing things, and I'm not part of it. But I also feel very good. It's like, yeah, that's I introduced that. But also, there's the musical analog to that scene mixing and stuff, which is introducing the artistic, aesthetic, technical, musical ideas of one scene into another, and things that would never be done in one place, doing them in another place, in doing things that are always done in one place in another circumstance where it's not so common. So, and that's part of what I do musically and socially.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I'll just say right out, I've been a big beneficiary of that, and I've been inspired by it, and I also know and probably do this partially because I've, learned from you, and you put me in a lot of those situations, whether it was, some of the Klezmer things, just working with downtown New York people like Marcus Rojas or, other folks, or the couple times that I've been able to play with your band Shirabi, and I remember the one thing, it was definitely a moment of, wow, I don't know if I would ever meet this person. I think I remember the bass player whose name I'm blanking on, but
FEMA, Ephraim, Booker King.
Booker King,
Okay.
and I was just like, wow, what a cool person to meet, and also Deep Singh, who is sort of the centerpiece of that band, and just feeling like, wow, this is a different world, and I can just let me try to like just hold on and see how see how I'm going, and I like learn a lot from those experiences. And then the other side of it that's really interesting is that even for me personally, I felt like I've met a lot of different groups of musicians in New York who don't necessarily know each other. And I think part of it is being a partial and out for me personally is being partially an outsider. So when I come in, it's slightly different. But I also think, I mean, a lot of credit to you for introducing a lot of different people, but it just feels very natural to me, having sort of developed, being a young person in my 20s, playing these gigs with you and other klezmer musicians mostly, and then other improvising musicians in New York, and having those kind of experiences. It feels very natural that, well, if someone's doing something really cool and somebody else is doing something really cool, well, maybe there's a way that they could do something really cool together. And of course, that's not always the case, but you kind of hear those connections. One of the scenes that I know that you've been a part of that I haven't gotten to see as much of is the Latin music scene in New York. And I was wondering, like, just because I'm curious, like, what are some of the people and ways that you got involved with that?
Okay, so, and probably this ties to why you haven't been part of it. When I moved to New York in the mid 80s, that was one of the places, there were a few, where any good trumpet or trombone player could immediately find work. There were so many Latin bands, so many clubs that you just started. And I'd been playing Latin music in Boston before I got here, so I already knew some people, had some numbers, had some friends who had moved to New York first. I called them up, I started playing, and everything from your really basic, pickup band that just kind of jammed on the bandstand to big shows with very big name artists. And I can just drop names, everything from playing with Celia Cruz and playing with Willie Colon and
Mm.
et cetera, et cetera. But and my hero, and I played in Tito Allen's band for many years. Tito Allen is a gentleman, a genius. Um, so what happened was, unfortunately, as time changed, especially because of the Happy Land fire, this was a big event. Basically, there were a lot of illegal social clubs, and they would have dances every weekend, and you went from one to the next. And often on the weekends we would do 3 gigs a night. There was the regular gig, which was, let's say, from 8 o'clock till midnight. Then there was the after hours gig, which was from 1 till 4 in the morning. And then there was the after hours gig, which was from
What?
like 4 till about 7 in the morning.
Oh my
And
goodness.
and on a good night you would do all 3 gigs. You do the gig, the after hours, and the after hours. And but these were often in illegal social clubs. And then there was a fire that killed a bunch of people in the Bronx in one of these clubs, and then they closed down a lot of them. That was just around the time. And then the music changed, and also like reggaeton became more popular, like the DJ sound became more popular, then the live music sound. Between all of that, um, there were less and less freelance experiences. And right now, you'd have a hard time just freelancing in the Latin scene anywhere. On the other hand, everything happens in a certain way. Um, yeah, for many years in the 80s and early 90s, I was freelancing in the Jewish scenes, in the Latin scenes, in the jazz scenes. Um, and then sort of the work scene changed, and there was more competition for all the jobs, and it kind of felt like you had to focus on one scene, either because you you got labeled as someone who wasn't part of that world, or just because basically, if there's only one Saturday night a week, and if you got 3 calls for a gig and you had to turn down 2, they're not going to call you as much. So um I ended up at that point, especially in, like, let's say the late 80s, I remember very consciously. So let's say a jazz gig might have paid uh, $30 or $40 on a Friday or Saturday night, and a Latin gig, well, they only paid 60 to 80 or dollars, but you might do 2 in a night, so maybe you'd make about 120, $150. And a Jewish gig or a Jewish wedding, you'd make 250 to $300. So
Okay.
I was picking the Jewish weddings because I had to make a living, and so I started falling more into that scene, and that combined with the fact that there wasn't so much freelancing, there was more fixed bands, I kind of fell out of the Latin scene. On the other hand, whenever I wanted to do a fusion project, so when the Klezmatics wanted to do Havana Nagila at Town Hall, I called up all my old compadres from the Latin scene, especially Arturo Farrell, who leads his own
Oh yeah,
orchestra and has
sure.
gotten huge. We were all people playing together in these different clubs,
Yeah.
and also all crossing scenes. That's what I loved about New York more than other places, is everyone kind of knew about everything, and people, the Puerto Rican cats would be making jokes in Yiddish outside the salsa gigs, and really people understood each other, and certainly people like Arturo and myself would be playing Latin gigs, Jewish weddings, avant-garde jazz gigs, and all these scenes. And yeah, the community of people, it also makes my life, just jumping to now, very easy because, well, we'll talk later about, let's say, my opera Hathaway, which comes out of these experiences. But when I need to call people, I like to say that I love New York because if I need to get an oud player and a Senegalese djembe player who can all play together in 15/8 with some Balkan musician, I know all the people to call, and they,
Right.
they all live right here. And it's,
And you might even find a sub on one of those
yeah,
instruments,
oh,
right?
for sure. So
Yeah, good. That's
it
not.
it makes it really helpful. But it honestly, it has also made my life so rich,
Yeah.
because it's more than just the people and the music. It's also really learning about, different experiences in life. And here's just like one of a million funny stories. So, we think of different scenes like you're talking about, but you wouldn't think something like uh, the Satmar Hasids and the Lubavitcher Hasids were 2 different scenes.
Right.
But because they, to 99.9% of the world, they look like the same person, they look like the same thing. But I remember hanging out once, playing a wedding, a Satmar wedding in a Satmar community hall in Brooklyn, but with some Lubavitch musicians in the band,
Oh
and
wow.
hanging out. And the Lubavitcher musicians wouldn't eat the food at the wedding
Oh, I love
because
that.
they didn't trust
The
that the
kosher.
Satmars
Oh
were
my god.
kosher enough for them. So I just realized, every time you think a scene, it can be very large or very, 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 very small.
Yes, the vantage point is about that
Yeah.
is like so insane, and I know that from going to where I live in Philly, we don't have as much Jewish culture kind of interwoven into the culture of the city in the same way that New York does. And obviously, I've been enough in New York that I know how to do that. And there's been so many cultural exports in TV and movies about the Jewish elements of New York or whatever. But I find, that whole thing, it's like once you zoom into that 1% of people who know what you're talking about, then within that, there's like, oh my God, it's a whole nother world. And I feel like I've had that with Yiddish culture around here and klezmer music in some ways. And it's been really interesting for me that the people who are my age and younger have come into this, like, their interest into this music and their liking of it from mostly from a political standpoint, and I think a slightly different political standpoint, because I know when you were doing, klezmatics for sure, took some political stands and some different stands in your work, and that your work, you often find yourself making work that comments on the politics or the realities of today. But it's been wild because, you started hiring me when I started working in the klezmer scene and with you and other folks when I was in my early 20s. And so I feel like when I'm meeting these people who are my age, they have suddenly they're from a different place. But it's that same thing where it's like, well, did you know that Yiddish song and klezmer music are like actually these, like, there's this big thing in there, and we get to, we have all this space to play around in, and it's really what it comes down to. It's like we've got all this space to navigate and see what's where, that you don't have to go from one. It's not all just one small thing. Oh, we're gonna add a klezmer tune, which of course is like, not a klezmer tune. But and it also, the other thing it reminded me of was those great big band gigs that you put together at the Stone. What was that, like 2013 or so?
It was over a number of years, the Shekhinah Big Band.
Yeah, the Shekhinah Big Band. And it reminded me of, it was a great opportunity to see all your communities and, like, see you mix up a bunch of the people in different ways.
Yes, because again, being blessed by knowing musicians who have so many different experiences. So that big band, and it's a classic 20-piece big band with 5 saxes, 5 trumpets, 4 or 5 trombones, and a very large rhythm section. And almost everyone in the band were people, of course, they come from all different backgrounds, whether we're talking about color or religion or community or ethnicity, whatever. But there were almost always musicians who had played Jewish weddings, had played Latin gigs, had played jazz big bands, and were experimental improvisers. And you wouldn't think that there were 20 musicians on all different instruments who had all those backgrounds. But again, really, really a wonderful thing like that. A trumpet section, like, well, your favorite section, the trombone section, Curtis Hasselbring does all that.
Yep.
Brian Dry does all that. Curtis Folks does all of that.
Yeah.
You do all of that. Regev does all of that. That's a trombone section, and every one of them plays Latin music and jazz and avant-garde and Jewish music and other things.
Yeah.
And so that, and the same was true of every section. And knowing these things, we're touching not only on scenes, but we're also talking on musical genres.
Right.
And, like, what is a musical genre? There's many definitions for what it is, or if not definitions, there's many meanings or readings of what it means to be a genre and in a genre. And on one hand, a genre is a set of musical rules that, if it does this, 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 and this, then it is in that genre.
Right.
And we could talk about what that is in any given genre. But also, usually a genre of music comes from a certain time and place, and therefore from a certain community. So whenever you touch on a genre, you're touching on something much bigger than that. You're touching on the community itself. And therefore, it's really interesting to both mix them together, because you're mixing things, but it's how you mix them. It's how you do it. And the how is a very important part for me, because it's not only getting people who have all these experiences, but it's the kind of people who like to play with each other,
Yeah.
who enjoy that, and to understand people who are, who study and really get into depth in things, so that you can talk about clave and its relationship to Bulgar rhythm, and how we're going to use these things together, and and people understand theoretical, and then on the other hand, people who know how to give up all their knowledge and just go to the purely aesthetic or emotional or ecstatic place. So that's
Totally.
a, and you said something earlier, and I thank you for saying it. Yes, for me, having my music be involved as part of a bigger social issues is always been very important to me.
Yeah.
That's in the klezmatics, but I wish I could say it's important in all my work. I can't say that because I've done some really pretty stupid apolitical things,
That's
but
okay too. It's good
that's
too.
okay too. But whenever possible, if I can do something that is important both musically and politically and socially, I feel much better about about about
Yeah.
myself and about what I'm putting into this world. Kind of whether it's the campfire rule, leave it a better place when you leave than it was when you got there, kind of rule, or those kind of things. But this is I true. The Klezmatics have always been a politically informed band, and again, even the approach to politics is different in different settings. So when you're
Yeah.
dealing with Yiddish and Yiddish music, you have a whole Yiddish socialist history to draw upon. So
Right.
we're dealing not only in genres or communities, we're dealing in time, looking backwards, looking forward, always relating to history and always relating to the present, and hopefully trying to push things forward. So all these things.
Yeah, no, and that's totally one of the things that I feel like I've learned from groups like the Klezmatics, and also just in general the whole way that Yiddish people take an approach to Yiddish culture. The people that I've learned from or I'm around regularly and working with, is that it's like we use the past to inform the present in a very specific and hard to summarize way, but it's very intense. Whereas I know, for me, growing up learning jazz, sometimes through direct contact with people who actually did it, but sometimes also through sort of like a more academic setting or whatever, people used to say things like, you got to study the past to understand the present, and it didn't always like click or spark into something. And I don't necessarily want to get off on why that is, although I love to talk about why that is. But with the Yiddish world, it was really clear about why that is and like what it did, and some, for me at least. And I just want to say one go back to the thing you were talking about, all the musicians you've gotten to work with and how they all have these open minds and have these different experiences. And one of the things that it's kind of taught me is that I just, being able to work with different generations of musicians, for me, one of the things I've been really lucky with is that I haven't worked with a ton of very bitter people. I think because they have this kind of mindset of like, well, I can go off and do something else, or I can explore, or I can like, I'm always trying to learn something new. And, so that, like, I think about those big bands, and it was just like a very exciting group. It was an excited group of people. And I was like, wow, I know some people who don't have that experience as musicians, where if they work with older folks, it's like, it's not as light, And so that's really cool. But to segue back to what you're saying about sounds, like, you're talking about genres and where they come from. And, obviously people take a genre and they say, well, if you're swinging, it's jazz. And if you're playing this, it's blah, blah, blah. And we know, especially because we've done some work exploring our own culture's music and history, that genre is potentially a lot more than that. And of course, when you have experience with real people playing Latin music, playing jazz, playing Jewish music, you know that it's a lot more of that. It's also the Satmar, the Lubavitch not eating the Satmar's food, because there really are different people and they have different music. So I was wondering, you've always thrown different kinds of sounds together. And I was wondering, like, how do those connections just kind of like, I mean, obviously it could be all the above, but do those connections just kind of like occur to you out of the blue? Or do you hear like, oh, this musical element is similar to this musical element, and I can sort of knit something together there? Or what are some ways, or like, how does that work for you with all these different experiences and communities kind of running around in your musical mind?
Hmm. Okay, give me a second.
Yeah,
Blah,
of
blah,
course.
blah, blah, blah. The how of it.
Yeah.
The how is what is personal. The how of it is what distinguishes my music from your music, you know, or and from someone else's. It's not, yes, there are some people who don't consciously combine things, but even among those who do, it's how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to uh, refer to a certain year. I don't remember what it was, when three albums came out in the same year, and two of them were mine. It was a Hasidic New Wave album, probably Psycho-Semitic, the Frank London Lawrence Glamberg Nagunim Trio, and Andy Statman's quartet Between Heaven and Earth.
Okay, yeah.
And I realized that on paper, in a press release, the three were exactly the same album. They were they were music that was based deeply and directly on Hasidic nigunim, Hasidic spiritual songs,
Yeah.
by musicians who were very well informed and steeped in Hasidic traditional songs in nigunim, and understood this, both the repertoires and the stylistic ways of performing them authentically, but who also had outside influences, especially jazz and other things, and mixed this traditional Hasidic nigunim with other outside influences, especially jazz and American music influences and improvisation. And by
Right,
that line,
right. Yeah,
they're
that's
the
totally,
same. They're the same
totally,
record,
totally.
and
What a funny thing. That's totally
and
true.
none of them sound anything like each other.
And that's
And
also
then
totally true.
and we could talk about why, because the point is, which nigunim, how did we approach them, what outside influences did we take in, how did we do it. So the it's not just the fact of mixing, and I know that I haven't gotten to how I do it, but um, I often think about the fact that although we all like to do the very simple game of taking melody from tradition A and putting it on rhythm from tradition B,
Right, right.
this is like the fun mix-up game, and it's always fun. And this is why we love the album Twist in the Freilachs and played a whole tribute kind, but it's not really anything profound. It's basically hip-hop sampling. Oh, and now we're going to
Yeah.
sample an oud player because we want to like represent Arabic, and it reduces everything to a representation and to a signifier. And a signifier is like the smallest, most cheap representation of a culture or a
Mm,
genre or a people.
I love
I'm
that.
not saying it's not fun,
It's fun.
but so what I often do and think about is, what are the other elements of something that are not so obvious but are totally different from something else. So often I will take formal elements from one tradition, or techniques from a tradition, which has nothing to do with the specific, let's say, musical content, but the form, the techniques, and say, well, that form is never found in this other tradition, but
Mm,
why not? Why can't we use this other formal element within a different tradition, musical language? And it's kind of like, I guess you could say, it's kind of like, well, it's the way cooking has evolved, I would say,
that's
because
good.
when people travel to different places, and by people I mean cultures, they often, by necessity, or by desire, have a new set of ingredients that they either are forced to use, they don't have the same original ingredients, or they have new ingredients that they didn't have, but they have their old techniques. So you can use a technique that you used to use, but with new ingredients.
Yep.
And so you have a new cuisine, which is not just the same as saying, oh, we're going to use, I don't know. Well, I can't think of an example. So this is why, by the way, I love, let's say, Malaysian Chinese food. It's
Oh, yeah.
a totally unique mixture of two cultures that has become its own culture.
Right.
And within the klezmer world, certainly, we could talk about this all. We could talk about it all night about the difference between European klezmer and American klezmer and Israeli klezmer.
Right.
And these are all authentic traditions that have grown in different times and places and have different aesthetics. So, it's very complicated. And I know you want to say something, but I'm just trying to finish the thought so
No,
we can
keep
move
going.
on.
It's all good.
So I guess the way I do things is I steep myself in whatever I get obsessed with and listen and analyze and dive into it and transcribe and play. And I often put together projects whose only purpose is to replicate something, which is a way of having fun, but it's also a way of learning how a music really functions. And then starting to then see it. It's almost like you just see how it affects each other. You see how things, and I think that what I just try to do as much as possible, depending on what audience I'm talking to, I might say I meditate, or I might say I smoke a fat joint. Either way,
Right.
but
Same.
the point is
Whatever gets you there.
get into a space to just think about how do these things connect? How do they reflect in each other? Can I make a bridge, Dan?
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned, or maybe you and I were talking about, I forget, an opera I wrote.
Yeah, you mentioned this
I wrote a
earlier.
Yiddish opera.
Okay.
Now, why did I write a Yiddish opera? Because I wanted to write a Yiddish opera, and it gets into a whole big thing about the Yiddish language and its preservation. And by the way, this goes back to what we were saying about community. And there's an expression in Yiddish of the golden akate, the golden chain, like a chain link fence. And this is how our culture continues from generation to generation. And people like myself, look at ourselves, we're just one link in this golden chain. Something was before us, we connected to it. Something comes after us and connects to us. And ultimately, we're just one part in this golden chain. And that's how I see myself in many ways. But back to the point, I wanted to write a Yiddish opera because basically very few people in this world who speak Yiddish, who are actually fluent in Yiddish, are going to be, they're mostly Hasids, and they're not going to be doing theater and music. But I love Yiddish theater. It was so powerful. And it was amazingly avant-garde into the beginning of the 20th century. And then things changes and Yiddish stopped being a spoken language so much outside of the religious community. And the religious community didn't actually see the values of having theater and avant-garde theater. So you have a lot of contemporary Yiddish theater, but often with actors who don't know the language, and they do the best they can.
Right.
And I realized that opera singers know how to sing in different language. So if I write an opera, an avant-garde opera in Yiddish, I can have contemporary Yiddish theater without having people who actually know how to speak Yiddish.
Nice.
So, and then don't ask me why, but I didn't want at that point to write a shtetl opera. I didn't want to write a klezmer opera. I wanted to write a Yiddish opera. Klezmer wasn't the important thing. Yiddish was. So
And that's another example of how once you get inside a genre, there's a lot of space in there that you can play around with.
Yiddish is not a genre. Yiddish is a language.
Right, it's a language. Right.
Yiddish is a language. Klezmer is a genre.
See, there you go.
There is a genre called Yiddish music.
Right.
But Yiddish is a language. So I just didn't want to write the Klezmer opera at that point.
That's fair.
I probably will now, but that's another point. And since we don't have a lot of contemporary, there's a few, but contemporary Yiddish writers who could write a libretto about something meaningful that wasn't a Jewish story,
Mm.
I had to search. So I found a poem written in Cuba by a refugee, a Jewish refugee who ended up in Havana in the 19 teens and in 1930, who wrote an epic Yiddish poem about Hatue, a Taino Indian chief who was the hero of Cuba, who led the first uprising against the Spanish conquistadors and who failed and was martyred.
That's so great.
Yeah, and I found this poem and I made it the the seed and the of my Yiddish opera Hatue. And in it, it's interesting. I used a lot of Afro-Cuban music. Now, of course, historically, this doesn't make sense because in the time of Hatue, in the, which is 500 years ago, there were no Africans there. The music was different. But as everyone who studies Cuban music knows, we know that there was a Taino music. We sort of have certain very minimal ideas of what it might have been because there are paintings and descriptions of instruments, but we don't know what it sounded like. And if we tell ourselves we know what it sounded like, we're kidding ourselves.
Okay.
So that being said, I didn't try to do something historically accurate, but I let things inform me. We used Taino instruments as part of it, but I used contemporary Cuban music, partially because we ended up setting the thing in a 1930s Havana nightclub. And again, I did my thing of getting musicians like Richie Barchet, the Klezmatic drummer, who's been playing salsa music since before he played Klezmer music.
That's for sure, yeah.
And Guido Gonzalez, who I used to play tons of Latin gigs with, and Norbert Stanschel, who plays salsa gigs, and who was in the Klezmorum, all these, again, these people, and Pablo Aslan.
But it's like, it's all together. It's like everything, it's kind of like unified in the same thing on every level. The people, the story, the ideas, where it comes from.
And we ended up telling a revolutionary anti-colonial story in 3 languages, Yiddish, English, and Spanish.
Great.
With a totally mixed cast on every level. Actually, not on every level. There really were no older people in it because that's not the characters we had. But other than that, I don't know, can we play the people an excerpt from...
Why, Frank? We certainly can.
Dan. And I just want to say it's not subtitled, but this is where the Taino chief, the chief was a woman of the tribe because the women were often the chiefs in the Bahiques. And she's captured and she's being tortured. It's a bilingual scene in Spanish and Yiddish, and she's being interrogated and she won't tell where Hatue, the big hero, is hiding. And then she sings her big operatic, you might try to kill me, but my soul is eternal. And you white people, you are the devil. Your only God is gold. I know what kind of people you are, and I will never live a life like yours. I will never debase my values like this.
Man, it doesn't get more operatic than that, right?
It does not get more operatic than that.
All right, I think let's give this a shot. So here we are, and we can listen to this. Let me start from the beginning there. Whoop. There we go. Awesome.
Per
Nice. That's so great. Yeah, and it worked out. We actually got to see the super titles most of the time in that shot, actually, so people can follow along with the words. Um, yeah, it's just so interesting. Opera is such, I mean, we could talk about this forever. Opera is such a great vehicle for epic things, for big ideas, for putting together a lot of different influences, or letting different cultures or ideas crash into each other. And like it's such a great experiment. So that's so cool that you got to do that.
Yeah, well,
Did you wanted had you wanted was that your first opera?
that was well, depending on how you define an opera,
Sure, sure, sure.
because even this is not 100% an opera because there's also spoken scenes mixed in.
Okay,
So,
okay.
and then I mean, I wrote another piece, Night in the Old Marketplace, based on a
Right.
parrot's story, which I guess is more of an oratorio song cycle. You know,
Hmm.
these are labels. You
Right.
know,
I mean, and again, it's just labels that you get to play around with and see what they mean to you, or let somebody else put on you after the fact and just deal with it.
oh, I know what I wanted to say. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Uh,
okay. You do
I,
it.
I and I don't want to forget it. I keep on forgetting it every time we go into thing. This goes way back to something you said way earlier about going into different scenes yourself and in different groups and how and knowing yourself.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and we didn't explore that. And I just wanted to point something out that's from my life. And it's a whole nother topic. And if we get a chance to do this again, we can explore it
We
later.
will. Don't worry. We'll definitely
But
do this again.
but the idea of okay, so I got known to the world through klezmer mostly, even though whatever, even though I've done so much more and
Right.
always have, and those people who know me from other things didn't make a difference. I've chosen many ways to react to this. Sometimes I find it frustrating and infuriating. Sometimes I find it very useful and effective and helpful. But I have to say that for me, the ability to walk into a room meaning a community, a space where I'm a stranger, where I'm an outsider, maybe I don't even speak the same language, maybe we don't even have a common language or something, although it helps to be a multilingual. Um, Two things help me be able to be in those rooms and communicate with people, especially people who are acknowledged masters in the thing that they do. And thank God I've had so many experiences with this. One of them is for me psychologically to know who I am. And that just comes, I believe, with time. You can't rush that. That's knowing who you are. But the klezmer thing, I have used it like a costume, like a suit of clothes. So even though personally I might really resent that I have this reputation, oh, Frank, he's the klezmer guy. If
Right.
I walk into a room, and I'm still walking into this room all the time, including yesterday, it's constantly, and it's like, oh, here's so and so, the queen of Macedonian gypsy music, and here's Frank, he's the king of klezmer music, whatever, whatever.
Right.
And
Yeah.
instead of like saying, oh, come on, the
Right.
it's like I you can use it as a place that allows, sometimes you can allow people to put you in a box, and it's a good starting point.
Yeah, that's
And
a good way to
then
think about
where
it.
you go from there is personal. If they want to keep you in that box, then maybe you're not going to have a long relationship with them.
Right.
But it's okay to have a name. So I've chosen to keep my resentment of the pigeonhole to myself, and try to use it as a tool that allows people to, oh, that's who you are, okay, now, and then we can work together from our different places.
Right.
So feel, let it, for every time it limits you, for every time someone says, oh, I don't want to use Dan, he's a klezmer trombone player,
Right.
which you'll get, and it's unfortunate that people's brains are that small and their ears are that closed that they don't hear.
Agreed.
But for every time there's like that thing allows you into a room,
Absolutely.
and it gives you a place in that room, and then you can get down to the real work of getting to know each other and doing something.
Yeah.
So
And it's true. And I think that like this is sort of to open it up to sort of where I want to sort of take us towards the closing, but thinking about today, working, a lot of people don't get to, I mean, I think you said you get to have some of that confidence just by living a life, but a lot of people, but you also seem to get to that confidence somehow by sort of knowing you can come from somewhere, or like you can use this box as a place. I mean, I think this is for me, this has been useful in working with other things. And I noticed that, and it's maybe grounding in experience, maybe it's grounding in culture, maybe it's grounding in even performance practice or something like that. But but I know a lot of people who don't have that grounding, and I've watched some people my age or younger find their way to a grounding, maybe in a tradition that relates to their own, personal background, or family background, or maybe one that doesn't. But getting that grounding has helped everybody I've seen find it just immensely, and the people who don't have it are kind of just adrift in weird ways, and so it's been really cool to see that. And I think that one of the things that I hope that our conversation, and like we have to talk to you more, and hearing about all these stories, is like right now, you were saying the things you learned about the scene were showing up and being there, right? And that's one of the things of all the post-apocalyptic societally destructive things I had in my head. The one where you actually couldn't be there with people wasn't ever a possibility for me. So this has been really surprising. And I have a couple of students who are going out into the world. One of them just graduated from Temple University in jazz, and I think he had a pretty clear picture of what he was gonna do, and now it's like it's been really hard. So like I just think I don't know what's for me, it's been really amazing knowing that I have communities of musicians and people that I can collaborate with, or going to ask me to collaborate with, or that we're still going to be trying to push each other forward in some way, now in this pandemic. But for people who, their job was their job, like the work for them was to find their way into groups of people and meet people and play gigs and get experiences and all that stuff, and not having that, it's really wild. And so I don't know. I don't know what the question is, honestly, but it's just like, wow, you've been able to use your experiences and your personality and put it together in so many different ways, like the Nagunim, from the Klezmatics to the Nagunim project to the Hasidic New Wave to Hatue, and like,
okay,
yeah.
I think I can find a question in that whole
Thank
thing,
you. Go for it. Help me out.
and answer. I've often thought that it's really, I'm so glad that I'm old right now when this is happening,
Mm, mm,
because yes, if I was like really young, like some of the people you're talking about, or even who's right in the midst of things, to have everything fall apart right now, and you're like, but I'm didn't even get started, or I'm just getting started. I mean, that's really hard. That being said, though, I'm thinking about the things I've been doing during this last pandemic period, and a lot of them have to do with people I already know. Uh, I've just finished, I guess, about my eighth of 12 klezmer trumpet duo. Actually, I let you play on one, so one is a trumpet trombone duo.
I
But
try to be my
yeah,
trumpetiest.
but so mostly it's people I already knew. I did, but with one project, it's a long story. I'll make it really short. The Klezmatics were supposed to do a gig with the Dance Theater of Harlem, got canceled, of course, and we decided to do a Zoom thing, not what we were supposed to do, and we decided to do little duets between individual Klezmatics and individual dancers, and I got paired with a dancer. Now, because, as I said before, and I'll say it again, I sort of can't do something that's somehow not connected to the world or not trying to address the world. Um, I decided not to just make some music for her to dance to, but I'd been going to a lot of protest marches this week's Black Lives Matter protest marches and things, and I really enjoying, and I was playing music at them and enjoying the chanting and the rhythms of the chanting, and I used a number of chants, Sun Ra-ish, but the Black Lives Matter chants, no justice, no peace, some affirmations, and then I sent her the music, so I actually composed and recorded a piece. The dancer um, took it and made a video in front of a courthouse, which was brilliant on her part.
Totally. I
And
saw that. It was so
we
cool.
made a really vital piece of one of the pieces that I've done during this period that I feel good about and feel very positive. But the point is, I've also made inroads into a new community, and maybe I'll end up working with her or with the Dance Theater of Harlem again on this. So it's like, even there are ways, whether they're conscious or whether they're planned or accidental, to take opportunities and to make new things happen even now in this. And part of it, I guess, is by being open, not feeling like everything is rigid, and being open and 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 basically looking at everything that one does on many levels. And one of the levels is that it's an opportunity. Everything I do, every time someone calls me to do something, this conversation, it's an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to maybe get across a philosophy, to teach things, but to communicate. So I do that. And so that's sort of a way. And if I was teaching people fresh out of college, I would probably try to think of ways, what could I tell them to do that might help expand them in this very contracted times.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, just to it's been amazing. And they teach me a lot too, and it's always great. And I think it's been, I really treasure like I really treasure experiencing firsthand from people, from you and other people, what it means to try to make everything an opportunity or find the opportunity in all these things, and then how to respond to the times, right? And you've actually done a number of pieces that have been direct responses to sort of what's going on, whether it's the pandemic or the protests. I know you did that, you kind of organized a piece for essential workers in New York, and then you've done some other things too.
We're still editing together. It's called For Our Courageous Workers. And it
Yeah.
was a citywide participatory concert. And we got over 80 video submissions of people performing the piece. And right now, my partners, Heinel Pivnik and Dorian Wallace, are trying to edit together 80 different videos.
Good luck. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. And then you
Um,
did drawing on your Jewish stuff. I know you did a Rufala Shalema and
right. Maybe,
Amisha Berach that
yeah, maybe
we have another one queued up for people.
there you go, DJ Dan in the
I know,
house.
right? This
Yeah.
is we're doing it
Okay. So
high.
let me
Great.
give
Yeah.
a
Give a
quick
quick thing
intro
and
on.
then we'll listen to
So
it.
among my obsessions, and I think it's important to have your obsessions, and I know you have them. I know when you made an album mixing, I believe it was either Nagunim or Cantora music with death metal or something, and you actually were telling me specifically that like 11 different subgenres of death metal and the particular rules of each one. So one has to find one's obsessions and get obsessed with them. That's how we learn. So I've been obsessed with old Ashkenazic cantorial music that they call chazanas, and I've done a lot of work with cantors, and a lot of it's on my Facebook page, and I did a new recording during the pandemic with Yankee Lemmer, which
Yeah.
is going to come out. But this is a piece where I'm playing an old cantorial piece, which is a prayer for healing. And this was a time, especially in New York, when many people were sick and dying, and
Yeah.
and I didn't know how to respond. So I took this prayer, and again, connecting history, I started by transcribing the great cantor Yesla Rosenblatt, and then this is also me learning. It's a little rough now when I look at it because it was all 3 months ago, but it was like one of the first pieces where I learned how to record myself, overdub, and make a video.
Nice.
So here's the Refuah Shalemus, and I put the words of
Yeah.
prayer on it.
That's right. That's awesome. This is about Misha Berach, get better, healing, try out new things. This is all good. Let's check it out. And where are you? Okay, I gotta find it now. That's funny.
That's it. That's not the beginning.
Yes.
Get the beginning.
Done. What? Okay.
There you go.
we go.
Beautiful. Well done.
Nice.
Thanks.
Yeah. it's really good to be able to still make music, you know? I mean, thank goodness.
Have to
And
do it.
you have to do it, and then and those moments when you start, it's like you said in the beginning. It's like that we do a lot of the obsessing, the community, all this stuff. It's at the end there's music, and it's really it really means a lot. It means so much, and I think that it takes a lot to put to it takes a lot goes into music. A lot goes into making music, and I know we got to. I'm glad we got to explore some of the stuff that's gone into making your life and your music here today. And I know we have a lot more to talk about someday, and we've definitely got a lot more music to play together. So
There you go.
thanks,
All of
Frank.
that.
We will do it.
Thanks, Dan. This was fun. Thanks,
Yay!
everyone, for watching and listening.
Yeah, have
And
fun. I
stay
hope you get it.
healthy
And
and be well.
thanks to CTMD for making this happen. And we will. There'll be some more. So
Good.
stay tuned. All right. I'm gonna stop.
Stop recording.
Ah.